Moving on to item number 13, the final financial report, fiscal year ending June 30, 2015, by Robin Bertagna, our Finance and IT Director.
Okay, thank you. Tonight I'm going to give you a lot of the background data and more information and charts and graphs that went into the CAFR that summarizes everything in a less graphical format. Lots of numbers and lots of detailed notes in the CAFR. I honestly do read it every year. It takes a long time to get through, to review it and find any problems that I might notice that the auditors didn't catch or missed or misclassified. So I'm not going to bore you with that much detail, but I've got charts and graphs for you tonight. First, I'm going to talk about the city's general fund, and then I'll move into the water and wastewater utility funds. This is the city's general fund at the highest level, showing the budget versus actual for both the beginning fund balance at the start of the fiscal year, revenues budgeted, revenues received, and expenditures budgeted and expenditures received. This is shown in millions of dollars. The original budget for expenses was $36.3 million. To that, we added a total of $2.1 million. That was comprised of grant-funded appropriations of just under $1.1 million, prior year purchase order encumbrance carryovers of about $250,000, MOU negotiations and salary changes of about $616,000, and strike team overtime for the fire department of about $150,000, bringing the final budgeted expenditures to $38.4 million. As I said, actual expenditures ended the year at $35.5 million. That was under budget by $2.86 million. This savings includes $382,000 of encumbrance carryovers, which will carry over to next fiscal year, and $690,000 in grant-funded programs that will also be carried over and spent into next fiscal year. So if you look at our true savings, we're under budget, but it could be more accurately described as just about $1.8 million. This still represents a significant amount of savings for the city. And of that total savings, about 64% was from salary and benefits, 24% from materials, supplies, and services, and the remainder from capital. The savings from salary and benefits was about $1.8 million and is attributable entirely to vacant positions throughout the city. Savings occurred across almost all departments and line items of the budget, and I'll show you a breakdown of that savings in later slides when I get to the expenditure side. As I stated in regards to the CAFR presentation, we did achieve our 15% fund balance policy reserve set aside this year. The next several slides focus on revenues, and after that I'll get into expenditures. Please stop me if you have questions along the way. This shows our sales tax revenues, which is our top general fund revenue for the city. I'm going to show you a 10-year history of all the actual revenues for each of the categories for our top 8 revenues tonight, so you can see what the trend lines for the general fund look like over time. This is the historical graph for the city's gross sales tax. It goes back to fiscal year 05-06 through the current year of fiscal year 14-15. It shows how much revenues declined during the Depression, when they began to recover in fiscal year 10-11, and then in fiscal year 14-15, they surpassed our pre-recession peak of fiscal year 05-06 by just over $1 million. So definitely shows the recovery of our sales tax. It's also worth mentioning that the fiscal year 15-16 budget, I try not to jump ahead to the current year when I'm telling you about last year, but the budgeted amount that we projected, not including the one-time sales tax repayment for the triple flip elimination that concludes this year, just looking at straight gross sales tax to gross sales tax, we have budgeted $12.12 million. So if we didn't achieve anything, it was based on projections 6 months ago. If we didn't achieve any new growth, we could still meet our budget projection for the current fiscal year. So that makes me feel good when we hear economists talking about recession potentially around the corner and coming soon. This is the quarter-to-quarter comparison to the same quarter of the previous year, showing over the last 16 quarters how we've done, and that 14 out of the 16 most recent quarters have been positive news for us. If you average our gains in fiscal year 14-15, the quarterly average comes out to 10.275% for the year, which is far and above the 3.5% that we budgeted. And I'm optimistic, but cautiously optimistic for the future. I attended a League Finance Institute seminar, and there 3 separate economists told us that we've had the longest running recovery period and that the recession is going to come. It's just a matter of when. I didn't see the recovery here locally until the recession allegedly ended in 2009. I don't think we saw the recovery till 2011, 2012. So I'm hopeful that we'll sustain the recovery period longer since it took us longer to see it. This is a comparison of the cash basis sales tax results along with the adjusted basis based upon the audit results provided to us by our sales tax consultant, HDL. I like to show this because eventually the cash and the adjusted equal out and catch up with each other. And this is the city's property tax history for the past 10 years. It shows you where we started in fiscal year 05-06, that revenues peaked in 07-08, continued downward at a steady decline until fiscal year 12-13, at which time they slowly began to increase, with the largest increase occurring in 14-15. And you can see that we're still 1.15 million below where they once were. So we definitely have not recovered completely in property taxes yet. I know it's hard to see this from the distance, but the chart at the bottom, that's what Terrell gave me this, is more what I'm wanting you to look at. And it's the median home sales price in Yuba City over a period of 2001 through 2014. To read my own small print, 2015, excuse me. And what this shows you is that here, if you kind of go across, you can see that we're back up to the values that we were at 2003 on the way up and 2007 on the way down. So it definitely shows the recovery. And that's important to us because home sale prices are definitely tied to our property tax revenues overall. The city's franchise fees over the past 10 years shows a smaller decline during the recession and increases since fiscal year 11-12. In 13-14, total franchise fee revenue exceeded the pre-recession high in 08-09, but grew even higher by about $100,000 in 14-15.
Through the mayor. Robin, just for the public's benefit, could you explain what franchise fees are?
Yeah, we receive franchise fees from PG&E, Recology, Comcast, and AT&T for using the city's public right-of-way to provide access for the utilities to customers. And they pay us a fee for that.
Thank you.
The city's recreation programs, you can see the peak in 08-09 when the GAP facility first opened before the recession, and then declining every year since. We've met with the community services director and discussed the decline in revenues, and I know he's looking at the programs offered and evaluating related fees and charges to analyze the overall decline and try to figure out what we can do with that. Expenses have gone down as well, not as much as revenues have, though, percentage-wise. The city's building permit revenues, you can see what a big change in them we've seen with the decline during the recession and throughout, with a return to a higher level, that level almost being exactly equal for the past 2 years. So it's significantly higher. One of the questions we asked related to this is how much is related to solar projects. So that's something that staff is evaluating also, with an understanding that at some point solar projects may cease to be being put in, at least for a period of time. So we want to be able to project those revenues. So that's something I'll be looking at for my mid-year financial report in the current year. The city's business license revenue shows only a small dip during the recession, with growth occurring in every year since fiscal year 10-11. Hotel motel surcharge revenues. You can again here see the decline, with the lowest year being in fiscal year 9-10, the recovery in recent years to a peak in 14-15. 14-15, I looked at and compared each individual hotel, and every single one was up except for one. So it just shows that we have a lot more tourism and a lot more activity at our local hotels. CSAG, again, shows the revenues declining since 06-07 through fiscal year 11-10, and then increases through 14-15. And this represents the city's total general fund revenues year over year, with one-time transfers of reserves to support the budget not included here. It shows that revenues peaked at $37.2 million back in 07-08 and then declined every year until 10-11, where they essentially remained flat for 3 years. We saw an increase of just over $1 million in 13-14 and a large increase of $2.22 million in 14-15. The 14-15 represents an all-time high for general fund revenues for us at $37.36 million. And that was in a large part due to the sales tax chart that I showed you at the beginning. If there's no questions, I'll move on to expenses. This shows you...
Robin, I do have one question here. The sales tax increase, what was the largest category of increase in Yuba City?
Automobile sales.
Okay, so it was the cars, the new car sales, basically doing their shuffle and newer locations.
Newer locations, new dealerships, and a lot of pent-up demand as the recession ended.
Okay, thank you.
Salaries and benefits. This is a citywide chart. This is not exclusive to the general fund because I wanted City Council to be able to see the patterns within salaries and benefits for the city. It shows the amount was highest in 08-09, then declined due to the furlough programs. Citywide expenditures have been increasing since 12-13 and would be quite a bit higher than they are shown here if not for the large amount of vacancies that we currently have. As an example, in April 2015, the total amount budgeted citywide for positions which were vacant but going through various stages of the recruitment process was just under $3.9 million. And of that $3.9 million, $2.8 million were general fund positions. This is a similar chart, but just includes citywide salaries, not including benefits. It includes all regular full-time city employees, plus overtime and extra help wages. The trend of this graph is very similar to that of the previous for salary and benefits. The next one will be shaped slightly differently. And this is for all of the city's employee benefits. It shows that while salaries to employees may not be going up, our benefit cost load certainly is. We're putting more money into benefits as healthcare goes up and CalPERS retirement costs go up. So I think that that can be clearly shown here. And then this is just the retirement component of the city's benefits. It looks like the cost actually went down slightly for 14-15, but keep in mind that we had all those vacancies throughout the year. And we've seen turnover where we're hiring people, but then we see other retirements, so we still have a big vacancy factor that we're trying to fill.
Hey, Robin, have you done a calculation on the CalPERS, the result of the CalPERS devaluing the interest rate yet for the kind of based upon a scenario of same year, what might be?
We've been unable to do that at this time. CalPERS hasn't provided any information to show how that's going to work. It's also contingent upon their investment earnings. So they're going to lower the discount rate percentages as they have returns higher to try to smooth it in so we don't feel it as painfully as we otherwise would. But it's going to mean increases for us. And I will bring projections forward as soon as they release any information that gives me something that I can base projections on.
So they're hoping to get better than the 2.4 or whatever it was this last year, so they can help smooth it in better then.
Well, that's the idea. The discount rate being at 7.5% assumes that we get an investment return of that or greater every year. So if they get an investment return of 10%, they'll take that extra 2.5% and buy down future rate increases until they get the discount rate down to 6.5%.
Right. Okay.
As far as the retirement slide here, if not for the vacancy savings, fiscal year 14-15 would be a lot higher on our cost factor. And CalPERS is, shall I say, wise to that now with their flat rate charges. Before, we've always paid a percentage of payroll for each of our plans that we have contracts with them for. And this fiscal year that we're in now, they implemented flat rate charges where we send 1/12 each month to them, and it's not a percentage of payroll anymore because too many folks are retiring and they have no ability to capture what they need in order to fund retiree benefits. So things are changing at CalPERS for sure. And this is a summary of the general fund expenditures as far as what percentage of budget was expended for each of the categories. So for salaries and benefits, we only expended 93.8% of our budget. That's very unusual. Just to give you a comparison, I'll step backwards in years. In 13-14, it was 95.7. The year before that, it was 97.8. The year before that, it was 98.7. So we've always spent more of our budget than what we're currently seeing now. And it's not that the budget's padded or anything. We budget for every single position what the actual true cost is expected to be. But that's how many vacant positions we have on a citywide basis that we're recruiting for. I mentioned earlier tonight that the savings generated from vacant positions was about $1.8 million. I compared that to last fiscal year, and that savings is about 3 times of what we've seen in previous fiscal years. It's significantly higher. We do not have total savings on vacancies because we backfill some of the shifts for public safety, police and fire with overtime when we have vacancies, just to have people providing services. So you can't look at just the budget savings for what the positions are budgeted at that are vacant, because I know we're backfilling a significant portion, probably about a third with overtime. 92% of the amounts budgeted for MS&S were spent. The 8% which was not spent amounts to about $680,000 in savings. This savings amount, though, should also be reduced for grants and purchase orders because those will carry over to the following fiscal year. So again, the actual savings from the current budget is about $1.8 million. These are our total general fund expenditures, showing the trend line over time, the reductions that we saw during the recession, and expenditures increasing with fiscal year 14-15, ending the year with $35.5 million in expenses. Next, on a department by department basis, it shows the total general fund savings, and this ties to the budget versus actual information that's in our audited CAFR. I don't adjust it for encumbrances or grant carryovers, because if I did, it wouldn't tie to what's in our audited financial statements, and somebody would eventually ask me why. So I show it to you at the same level as everything is in our audit report. But it shows that citywide we had savings in almost every single department. And the fire department, again, exceeded their budget because of their constant staffing model with overtime. Represents the line item savings on a line item by line item basis, so you can see where the savings occurred for each of the categories. We ended up over budget in four of the categories, and that's because it's outside the department's control. We haven't added to line item budgets in many years because of our deficit spending and our deficit budgets. So departments have had to make up for that savings by controlling costs and other line items. And this is the highest level summary comparing the revenues and expenditures, with revenues in blue and expenditures in yellow, showing that in fiscal year 13-14 we had a surplus of $345,000, and that grew to $1.81 million in 14-15. I included this slide on our Economic Stabilization Reserve Fund just to show the funds are still there. We haven't done anything with them. We need them to tide us over, because even though we had a surplus at the end of the year, we do still have a budget deficit, and we need the ESR to tide us over until fiscal year 17-18, when we're expected to no longer have a deficit. So with that, unless there's any other questions, I'll move on to water and wastewater.
Any questions at this time? Seeing none, move on.
This is a summary of our water utility, including revenues and expenditures, budget versus actual. It shows that on the water fund, our revenues came in 4.9% less than budgeted, or $517,800. Given the drought and the reductions in the water sold, this is actually good news for last fiscal year. There are several different revenues included in the category of operating revenues that helped make up some of that difference, including a couple $100,000 in a settlement that we got this past year. Water sales revenue are down due to the drought, which is good because we need customers to conserve. But the other side of that is when comparing the amount of water sold to the revenue dollars we received to 2 years previous, because that's how the state wants us to compare it. We look at our revenue dollars, they were down by 5% for the fiscal year 14-15, and consumption was down 17.6%. So a considerable difference there, and that's due to our base rate charges applying even when customers are conserving more, they still had the base rate charge. And I'm not going to jump ahead too much into fiscal year 15-16, but I think it's important to know, and I'll touch on it in my next slide, what the consumption and revenue decreases look like in the current year, because we need customers to conserve more to meet the 32% requirement that the state has set for us. The water fund received $4.6 million in one-time grant revenues. That's what you see there, budget and actual. Those were spent for capital projects. $2.5 million was from the Prop 84 water line project, and $2.1 million was from the Prop 50 grant for the low lift pump station project. Capital revenues were significantly under budget. This was mostly attributable to anticipation $1.6 million in capital connection fees related to the Prop 84 water line project, which were not received in fiscal year 14-15 and were rebudgeted in 15-16. Operating expenses ended the year $466,000 under budget, and looking at the categories, there was about $201,000 savings in salaries and benefits, $63,000 in special equipment O&M, and $172,000 in chemicals. Our debt coverage ratio that we look at every year to make sure that we are maintaining the covenants that we have in our bond documents in order to ensure we can make our debt service payments. The calculation is included here for the last 3 fiscal years and for the budgeted 15-16 fiscal year. And I don't want to give the impression that the water fund is doing fine in 15-16, because it has the one-time money of the Prop 84 water line connection fee revenues included in this 13 million figure here. If that weren't included, this bottom line would be less. Furthermore, we budgeted about 10 million in water revenues, and we're not going to see that much because we stepped up conservation measures since we put into place the 15-16 year budget. So that said, and looking at our conservation data from July 1st through the November billing cycle that we completed, our water conservation is down 29.7% overall, averaging the fiscal year out, and revenues are down 17.4%. So a good size hit to our water utility. On the expenditure side, what was I going to add here? If we took out the capital connection fee revenues that we have in there budgeted in 15-16, it would bring our debt coverage ratio down to 0.97. We would be below that 1.2. So clearly, we'll be addressing that, the drops in our revenue when we look at our rates as part of our rate study. On the wastewater side, similar summary for you with budget versus actual revenues and expenditures. Operating revenues ended the year at about 103% of the amount budgeted, with actual revenues being about $353,000 more than budgeted. Operating expenditures were only at about 86% of the amounts budgeted, which equated to about $1.27 million in savings. Looking at the categories to see where that savings occurred, salaries and benefits was about $486,000. Heat and power, about $285,000. Professional services, $103,000. O&M, $192,000, and chemicals, $56,000. So quite a variety of categories, but a significant amount of savings there where we budget for it, but if it's not needed, it is not spent. And here is a similar slide on our wastewater for our debt coverage ratios. It shows that we far exceed the 1.2%, showing the history over time, with the budgeted amount for fiscal year 15-16 being 1.73%. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions of Robin?
Yeah, just a quick question to the mayor on, obviously that 1 year our debt coverage ratio is 1.29. Is there a minimum that we need to be at all times?
Yes, 1.2.
Okay.
Our bond covenants say we'll maintain a ratio of 1.2, and if we go below that, we have bond covenants that say we have to raise rates to cover it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, it's just for a note and file. And once again, Robin, thank you for an excellent report. I think we should always move these up to number 1 on the agenda anytime that you make presentations. So everyone attending city council meetings will have an understanding of the city's financial status at any given time. Thank you.
You're welcome.